morning, everyone. My name is Rowan. I am the Zoom host for this course offered by the Diocese of Washington School for Christian Faith and Leadership, and I am so glad that you're joining us this morning. I will let Davey introduce himself.
Good morning, and thank you so much for being here. Really great to see some folks today and to engage this conversation on mid-year budget and mission review. My name is Davey, and I'm the Executive Director of TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. I am beaming into your living room or office or kitchen from my living room here in San Francisco, California, where it is just 7 in the morning. So you all have had a little bit more time to greet the day. But I am really glad to be a part of this. This is the first in a series of webinars that TENS and the Episcopal Diocese of Washington will be doing throughout the year. We have a couple more planned, and I think and one more in sort of more strategic stages. We're trying to figure out what comes next. But I'm really happy to be included and invited into your diocese to do this work. TENS is a ministry of and for the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Church of Canada, and we provide resources for pledge campaigns, and we provide a resource library, webinars, training on stewardship and fundraising topics in our faith-based ministries. Our website, if you haven't been on it in a while, if the last time you checked out our website was a few years ago, come back to tens.org. It's a completely new website with a more robust resource library. The Diocese of Washington is a member diocese of TENS, and so therefore everything on our website is accessible to you. And we are grateful for that. Thank you for your partnership. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint video today, or a PowerPoint slide deck, and I'll be sharing my screen. And so that means I won't be able to see all of you. If you need to get my attention, use your reaction button at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. That will put you at the top of my list of people I can see. And then I'll be able to see that you've got a question. I welcome your questions because it's how we learn, and it will make this this workshop much more interesting for you, I think, if you break down and ask the questions that you've got. While I'm speaking, if something occurs to you and you want to wait till I catch my breath, you can also type it into the chat. Every few slides, I will pull up and I'll take a look at what's been typed in. It's also a great place to share other resources that come to mind. With that said, I will be sharing my screen. I think this is being recorded. In fact, I know it is. I see it happening in front of me. That will be ready for you to look at later. I will also send Rowan the slides that I used today in English and in Spanish, so that if you want to share this video or this slide deck with your vestry or your stewardship committee or your friends and neighbors, have a watch party, we'll be able to accommodate that for you. Sharing my screen now. All right, welcome and thank you for being here this morning. We all have a choice on Saturdays, and I'm glad that you've chosen to spend a little time learning and talking about a mid-year budget and mission review. Our learning objectives today are to talk just about why a mid-year review or some sort of report mechanism on stewardship and our progress is important in your community. We'll be talking a little bit about that, and I'll ask you to perhaps weigh in on ideas you have or things that you're doing in your congregation on this. We'll talk a little bit about how we report. We'll be talking about money, mission, and members. So how we create our reports and how we do that work together is really important, and I'll give some tips. and some ideas on just how to construct a report and what might be interesting or available for you. Stewardship begins and ends with gratitude. Stewardship is the outpouring of our gratitude for a generous God who created us and all that is. And the outpouring of love that comes from that is expressed through our gratitude, through our sharing. So I like to begin a conversation about stewardship with a little practice of gratitude, because our stewardship is really about our giving, everything that we give. I know that we often talk about the three-legged stool of time, talent, and treasure in Episcopal stewardship circles. And we really say, well, okay, we're focusing on the treasure because that's what we're talking about here. But I want to encourage us to remember that all three are very important, that our communities are enlivened, enriched, sustained through the efforts of time, our volunteers. Churches run on volunteerism, on our talents. So people contributing their wisdom, people contributing their life skills, people contributing their education and their collected wisdom, and their treasure. And our treasure isn't just about the money that we put in the offering plate or the pledge that we make. It's about everything that we do to enable our generosity. It all comes from gratitude because everything that we receive is from God. Therefore, when we're thinking about our stewardship, we're really talking about all the choices that we make with money, how we spend our money, how we save our money, how we invest our money, how we give our money away. All these are choices informed by our faith, rooted in our gratitude. It's about our volunteering. It's about the time that we spend in church. It's about the way that we engage with each other. And I'm going through these because I hope today that what we can communicate is how to report back to your congregation on your measures, your metrics of how people are engaged and engaging in your community. So our volunteering is really important. From our committee structure and our guilds and our governance to our operations and to our ministries. We rely on good volunteers to do that work. It's about our risk taking. It's gutsy to go into church and have ideas and share them in a community, even a community of people that we trust, because we open ourselves up. We open ourselves up to vulnerability. We bring in parts of our other life to church, and those are risks. Our churches also take risks, sometimes bold ones, in the sorts of ministries they offer their neighborhoods, in the kinds of social engagement they are doing. These are things that push us into the space of perhaps comfort and discomfort, taking risks, being out there and visible in our communities. Sometimes we have to take a stand. And that's a part of our gratitude too, because we are given everything. We want to make the world a better place. Risks go into that. It's about our leadership as well. And I'm not just talking about our elected vestries or our convention, our diocesan or general convention. It's about the way we lead our neighborhoods and our communities. We are, all of us who are engaged with church, also engaged in other aspects of our lives and in the communities. We are leaders at work or in our industries. We are leaders in our neighborhoods, on perhaps committees or local nonprofits or in civic government. We express our leadership by showing up at events, by voting, by doing the things that are important in our civic society. When we do those and they are informed by our faith, we are expressing our own Christian leadership in community. This is also a part of our stewardship. Now our stewardship seems really robust, doesn't it? Because it's about all of these things. It's also about accepting gifts. So gratitude and abundance and generosity also require us to be generous with ourselves. And when people give us gifts, either their time or their talent or their treasure, we have to learn how to accept that with love and gratitude and grace. These are not always easy things to do. We are proud people. We are humble people, and sometimes accepting the gifts that others give, or when we stand in awe of how much time a person donates to their church, we don't always recognize what goes into that. And so we must accept our own, the compliments, the love that people share with us as well. So start your mid-year review with a practice of gratitude. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to keep talking about a mid-year review. And when this was envisioned, it was thought to be an event, sort of a second annual meeting, something that happens in June or July, where we bring people together and we look at the budget. And we'll certainly be talking about that. But I want us to break down or break away from thinking about this as a single event. If we choose not to do a single event in which we present everything and report on everything, what are the ways that we can report throughout the year on our metrics, on our budget, on our accomplishments, on our mission, and these things? So how can we put it into our newsletters? How can we make announcements from the chancel steps? How can we create coffee hour or rector's forum conversations? How can we use technology to help us with these things and engage in Zoom groups? So this is an invitation. Whenever you hear me say mid-year review, this could also be a collection of skills that we put into our weekly or monthly newsletters, or on our frequent website updates, or our social media channels. I don't want us just to think of this as an event we have to plan. That said, why do this work at all? Why do we need to engage in review? It seems like our annual meetings happen at their moment in time where we elect our leadership and we go over the budget and we're transparent and accountable with our community. And then we get busy with the work of church, and we go all year until we have to report on that again. Or I should say it's our joy to report on that again. But why would we engage this work more often than just at our annual meetings? One of those reasons is about our stewardship formation. One of my goals with the Episcopal Network for Stewardship is to help us remember that stewardship is year-round. And I know we say year-round stewardship all the time, but I don't know that we all know what that means. I don't know that I know what that means all the time either. It's a definition that we're always creating and rewriting. What it doesn't mean is that we're asking for money all year round and having conversations about how you can give and give more. What it does mean is that there's an ongoing recognition of the gifts that it takes to run a community and a gratitude for those gifts. We have to think about this all year round in order to make ourselves ready for our fundraising pushes whenever those happen. If you're a fall campaign church, or a Advent campaign church, or an Easter campaign church, many different congregations do it in different ways. If you're going through this conversation year round and people are ready and open to the spirit of generosity, it will become much easier to do our fundraising when it comes time. People will have this conversation. And we need formation activities to do that. So things like reporting on our mission, they're little triggers that help people remember my gifts are being used, and the church needs my gifts in order to accomplish its work in the world. It's also important that we bring people together to talk about money. Money and church is not always an easy topic. And I know that many of us would prefer not to talk about money in church. And to those, and even to myself, when I need the reminder, I remember that Jesus spent a very lot of his short ministry with us talking about money. In fact, 40% of the parables, 16 out of 40, are about money or possessions or stuff. Jesus uses money as a metaphor, as a lesson, sometimes as the object of his stories. And he does that because money in the first century and money in the 21st century is really important to us. It's how we express right or wrong. It's how we express so much that's going on in our lives. It's about our hopes and our fears and our dreams and our plans, our worries, our securities and our insecurities. It's how we define our successes and our failures. Money becomes a tool, a language that we use to express all kinds of stuff. Maybe it's not good practice to put all that stuff onto money, but it's happened, and it's happened apparently for millennia, because Jesus also used the metaphor of money often in his stories. So there's precedent for us being able to talk about money and faith communities, and for it not to be seen as a taboo topic, something that we have to worry or whisper about. That said, we don't want to spend all of our time talking about giving and working more to give more to the church. This is not a prosperity gospel or a transactional sort of environment. What this is an awareness of how money impacts our lives and how our money impacts our ministry. The other benefits of being able to review our money and our mission occasionally is that we can update and engage on our ministry priorities. Those things that we decided in our annual meeting were really important to us, that we wanted to accomplish throughout the year, or maybe revisiting our strategic plan or some sort of goals or objectives that we did on a retreat, pulling those off the shelf, dusting them off, taking a look at the things that we said we wanted to accomplish and being able to report on them. How are we doing? Where are we at with those goals? It's also a commitment to transparency and accountability. This is an essential part of running church. We must be transparent and accountable to our members, to our community. So this means things like publishing your budget, if not on a bulletin board, perhaps on your website. People should have access to it, as well as your vestry minutes. These things are helpful in communicating that everybody's on the same page. There's nothing to hide here. It's also a way that we remind people that we can openly engage in the conversation about governance and money and finances. It's not something that we have to hide behind a wall or in a dark room or in the buried places of our heart. These are open and transparent conversations. It's also a good opportunity to check on how engaged your members are in the mission of your congregation. So it's a temperature check, really. If people they proposed a good idea, they said they wanted to do it, but they're not supporting it with their time or their talent or their treasure, it might be a time to revisit that goal. Do we really want to engage this ministry? Was it a great idea, but we're not ready to operationalize it yet? Might we think about some other way to change this ministry? Or maybe we need to double down on it. Maybe we need to call it into a greater sense of priority for us. So it's a good way to check on our goals and see how we're doing and see how connected we really are to them. Finally, it's a good reminder to keep our pledges up to date. Online giving and recurring donations have certainly been a great improvement for church treasurers to keep cash flow, which is so important in so many of our congregations, to keep cash flow going throughout the year, because checks get sent, auto bank checks get sent, or people toggle that recurring donation on their form. And so money just keeps coming out of the account and into the church account. These are great tools for our cash flow, but for those check writers among us, or those people who rely on on the service, the church service itself, to remind them to put money in the plate or to make their gift. The summer can be a challenging time when people travel. I'm not talking about 2020 and 2021 because these are strange times, but in general, as we think about that summer slump that a lot of our congregations can get into with their cash flow, recurring donations or a reminder is really helpful to keep people on track. So let's talk a little bit about how we report on our money. Numbers are an indicator of what's happening, but they do not tell the whole story. This is an invitation for us to take a deeper look at your campaign performance. How did your pledge campaign perform? How much money was raised? And really beyond that question, how many people were engaged in making gifts, in asking for gifts, in talking about the conversation? If it's a small number, then it means we're not thinking broadly enough. If our pledge data reveals that people are making the same gift over and over again, that's good. We love reliable donors, but it means maybe they're not being challenged. They're not being asked to do more. And we can think about ways to encourage that. We have a webinar coming up later in this year called Breaking Through the Pledge Plateau that we will try to address this question. How do we look at those donors and help them right size their gifts and think about their giving again? Numbers do teach us a few things, though. They're a practical measure of our expected revenue, of course. That's what the pledge campaign does at the end. It comes up with a number. This is how much we raised. This is how it fits into the budget. This is what we can do with it. This is a little plug as a career fundraiser. This is a little plug for let's raise the money before the finance committee tells us how much money we should raise. So let's do the pledge campaign. Let's make our best gifts before the finance committee says, here's the hole that needs to be plugged by fundraising. It's really better when we make our best gift and then give that to the treasurer and say, how can we make a budget that works out of this? And what do we need to ask for more? Do we need to cut some things? Do we need to find some other sources? It's better if that conversation happens after we've made our first gifts than going into a campaign and saying, here's our goal from the get-go, and here's what we have to do in order for our budgets to work. What am I saying there? So yes, we need to make our budgets function, and we all have a number in mind about that. Let that be what it is, but encourage people to make their best gifts and then figure out what to do with them and how to do it with them. Some more faithful stewardship, donor-centric approach to doing our fundraising. And I think it's a really important thing. As stewardship committees, I think it can be often demoralizing when they're given a number by the finance committee or the vestry and said, you have to go achieve this. It's hard work to do, and it puts a lot of pressure on really good volunteers. The numbers also teach us they're a small window into the capacity and generosity of our donors. And I say a small window because pledge data doesn't tell everything. What it does tell us, though, is gives us a general range of where people are comfortable making their gifts. I'm in the Diocese of California, and I worked with a congregation a few years ago on a capital campaign. And capital campaigns are fascinating because you're asking for something above and beyond the pledge, for a specific task, for a goal, and it's time limited, and all those things that go into capital campaigns. But what we discovered at this one congregation I was with is that they were able to raise 477% of their pledge and plate in a capital campaign. Almost 500%. So this is huge, right? 5 times more than they bring in a year, they were able to raise in a capital campaign. That's an extraordinary story. But what it tells us is that there is capacity in that congregation to make some extraordinary gifts. And people might not be making their very best gift in their stewardship campaign. Perhaps there are other ways to motivate these people. So when we really take a look at our pledge data and we look at who's making gifts and what their capacity is, we get a sense. Now, I'm not suggesting that churches become fundraising machines like many of our nonprofits are. That's a lot of work and it's a great commitment, and it takes money and time that perhaps our faith communities don't have and perhaps shouldn't have. But we do need to take some lessons from our nonprofit brothers and sisters and learn how we can engage the work of understanding our donors, understanding their capacity, understanding their motivation in order to make our best gifts. They're also an important measure of impact or adoption of the mission. Sad to say, Episcopalians often vote with their dollars and their pledges. If they are unhappy with the way church is going, they may hold back on their pledges. This is passive aggressive, but it's also one of the truths in church fundraising, something we need to think about. And so when we notice trends in our giving, when we notice things are changing, unexpected patterns that we can't explain with sort of a town industry failing or some other bump in the economic landscape, we might need to take a look at what's going on in our congregation. Are there rumblings? Are there undercurrents? What do we need to do with that? That's not to say that we should be controlled by our donors and by our pledges, because I think sometimes truth makes people uncomfortable, but still needs to happen. That said, it's an indication of where people are at, and sometimes that data is in and of itself useful. Got a couple more slides on reporting about money, and then I'm going to stop our slideshow and bring us into a conversation. I hope that you'll have some questions and also some practices that you're doing. So be thinking about that as I go through the next couple of slides. We'll have a little chat. A few more notes about numbers. So we really need to analyze them. I look at pledge, when people ask me to take a look at their pledge campaign, can you help me set up this year's pledge campaign? The first question I say is, can I have 3 or 5 years of data? I don't need to see the names, take those off my list, but I would love to see where people are at. Are they trending up throughout the last few years? Are they staying flat? Are they going down? And someone who knows the names might be able to say, oh, this is why their pledge is changing. That's great information. We need to know that. But when we can't explain it, I have questions, right? And so as a fundraiser, as someone who works with churches to help people make their best gifts, it's for me to say, what are we doing to reach out to these people? Whether it's globally through some formation or individually through some conversation, what can we do to address this? So knowing the trends is really important. And analyzing individuals over time is a really helpful task. Are they, if they're staying the same and you know that they're still in their prime earning years, they're not living on retirement income, and they're not just starting off in their career, but they're in that middle place. Maybe their kids are already graduated, but they're still in their careers. If their pledge hasn't changed, why? What's going on? Maybe they should be asked to increase. Maybe you should be thinking about them. Maybe they'll say, no, my money's going somewhere else, and that's fine too. But we should pay attention to who is giving, how they're giving. We should look at each member specifically. And I know that can be an alarming statement for those of us, especially who are sensitive, as we are, to pastoral issues in our congregation. We don't want to see dollar signs when we look at our members. We don't want to think about that. So I encourage us to think about questions about money as pastoral issues, not as financial ones. Because when somebody is talking about their gifts and their giving, they're really talking about all the things that they are concerned with, afraid of, engaging with in their lives. So thinking that through and having individual conversations about money can be really helpful. As we report on the budget, it's interesting, I think, to talk about the impact. And we'll spend a little bit more time later this morning talking about impact when we talk about our mission. But I want us to think about narrative budgeting and narrative reporting. How we talk about our mission and our metrics as opposed to line item budgets. We must do a line item budget. I fully understand that. And it should be available for people to take a look at. We also shouldn't just let the budget document sit on its own without some narrative around it, either narrative that we write up as a document or create as a narrative budget. TENS has some examples of narrative budgets on our website, and I will put them in the toolkit after this so that you can have access to them. A narrative budget takes our fixed costs and puts them into ministry categories. So for example, if your ministry categories are youth and families, worship, outreach, pastoral care, they could be, any of these categories and more that you create. A narrative budget takes our salaries, it takes our building costs, it takes our utilities, it takes our insurance premiums, and it puts those into our mission categories. So rather than saying we spent $100,000 this year on our building, you say we spent 20,000 of our building to do youth ministry and $40,000 of our building expense to do worship or whatever. So you're taking it and you're putting it into categories that make sense. And it takes it away from a line item that doesn't really give it its importance and puts it into our mission. Every dollar in your church has a purpose, just like every dollar in your household budget has a purpose. So every dollar that churches take in is going toward our ministry in some way. Let's account for it that way so that people can see the real impact of their giving. We should also report on notable changes in practice or expectation. What do I mean by this? I mean that when our budgets or our income reflect something that we didn't expect, rather than saying, oh, we're running a deficit, or wow, we have this interesting surplus, we should endeavor to explain it so that people understand it in its context. Deficits are not good, but they're really scary when we don't understand why they've happened or what we're going to do to address them. And so if we publish a budget and it has a deficit in it, or we publish a review of our mid-year progress or our year-to-date, and it's showing that we're off track, we don't explain what that means. Oh, because people give at the end of the year, so don't worry about that, it's going to catch up later. Or we had some extraordinary expenses at the beginning of the year when the water pipe broke, and we're still waiting for insurance to help us recoup that. Help people understand what the deficit is about. If it's just an operating deficit because we are spending more than we're taking in, then there are some other conversations to have, and we can talk a different day and a different time about what a right-sized budget looks like. But it's important to remark on your changes in your budget and not just leave it to people wondering. Why? Because what we do with our money, what we do with the money that members give us, or that endowments that have been set up by people who have come before us, it is so important for people to see the impact and the measure of their gifts on their community, so that they understand that there's legitimacy, that there's purpose, that there's need. If there's a ministry that's experiencing trouble, don't hide it, talk about it. So if it's about the expectations you set up at the beginning of the year and you're not able to meet them for whatever reason, the neighborhood didn't really need that ministry, and so the demographics aren't there, or it's been really hard to staff that position because it requires a high level of skill for not a lot of money or enough hours to fund it properly, whatever it is, start to report on it so that people aren't left with lingering questions. Why did we propose that and we're not doing anything with it? Where's my money going that has been spent on this? Help people understand when things are going wrong, how they can help, because they will. They will either find ways, creative ways, to help you solve that problem by giving more of their wisdom and experience, or perhaps be led to make special gifts or other ways to help that ministry flourish. But when we don't report on what's going wrong, we don't give people the opportunity to engage in fixing it. This is really important in a community. Finally, reporting on where we're at with our budget year to date can help that mid-year cash flow, as I talked about before. We might ask our donors or our members if they're going away on vacation or going to their second home or something like that, to make a prepayment of their summertime pledge, or to establish some kind of recurring donation so that the church can keep its cash flow. This is really important, especially in some of our smaller congregations that rely on cash flow week to week. Advocate, please, for online giving. You can make your gift from anywhere. I do all of my giving on my phone these days through various apps. I make my charitable donations on my phone. I make my church gift through my phone. And that works whether I am in San Francisco or on the other side of the world. So really, setting up online giving will help you and help your congregation maintain cash flow. And advocate for EFT or bank checks, recurring donations, other automated bill pay services that your bank might offer. These are all ways to keep people being able to make their gift when they can't be with you. We have seen in 2020 and in 2021 an extraordinary adoption of online giving throughout the church. It has been beautiful to witness, even in my own church, which for decades resisted online donation because of those darn transaction fees that go along with them. In the pandemic, we saw a need, and we saw the ability to say, well, maybe we can swallow some of these transaction costs in order to keep cash coming in. What's more important? And what we saw, and what many congregations are experiencing, is that their cash flow is better, their gifts are larger, it's frequent and consistent, and that this really helps us make our best gift and keep it coming through. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now before we go into talking about metrics and mission. And I would love for you to share some of your ideas, things you're doing currently in either your budgeting or your reporting on your budgeting. If you want to come off cam and show or come off mute and talk a little bit about what you're doing in your congregations, that would be great. Somebody's got to be first.
Well, This is Susan. I am assuming that we're going to talk about how to present the budget to the congregation, to the report, mid-year report. We're getting ready to have our annual meeting, so I think that's your next section. So that's what I'm really looking forward to hearing about.
Great.
I can actually share a little bit about this. So I wear many hats in my congregation in the Diocese of Massachusetts. I'm our parish administrator as well as our lay minister for children and youth. And as an administrator, I'm very involved with stewardship and making stewardship easily accessible, making it easy to donate on our website, to making all of our materials look awesome. And there's a few things that have helped us over the past few years increase giving and keep giving trending upwards for folks in a way that doesn't feel very pushy. We're a congregation of small pledges. I think we have one family that gives more than $12,000 a year, and it's like just over. So we're mostly small pledges, but we share a chart, and I'm going to pop it up real quick, of where people's pledges are and what a tiny step up would do. And we encourage people based on our mission and how we're using the money. We send a long letter explaining everything that we did with our previous year's budget and what we're hoping to do with the next one, and show people it's just a tiny increase a month and how much of a difference that would make for us. And that's been very, very helpful. Also making, it easy to donate online. We changed databases to Breeze, which has really great integrated online giving and pledge campaign tracking. And the other thing that I really like, both as the website builder and sharing how we feel about gratitude and stewardship, is during our stewardship season in the fall, we have parishioners offer a gratitude moment in place of the second lesson during our service. And I save recordings of those gratitude moments, and we share them in our newsletter with the text, and we put the audio on our website so people can hear the gratitude that encourages people to support their congregation.
Rowan, thank you for that. Really, really good tips. That step chart, I love. I love it as a tool. I always recommend it because it does exactly what you say. It shows you what an incremental change can do, and it also places your gift in the context of everybody else's gift, right? What we do when we see that step is we look for where am I in that, right? And it helps me understand, am I giving in general what my fellow parishioners give, and what does that what does that mean for me? How does that play into the greater context? So this is really important. I love the step chart very much. It's a really useful tool. I like your Breeze database too. It's a good one. There are a lot of databases out there, a lot of choices. Some of them are expensive, some of them aren't. Breeze is a particularly good one. I also like it because Breeze has a module, a way to also track volunteers and people and track hours. And I think this gets into some of the next part that I want to talk about. Volunteer management is so important in our congregations, and being able to talk about how we track volunteers through our church and what they're doing is really important, both as a measure of how engaged people are and also as an invitation to serve. And so I think it's a really good thing to be able to talk about that. So databases, I'm kind of a nerd about databases. Are there any other questions about how we report on money and thinking about that before we move into metrics and mission? Jennifer, you came off mute for a second.
Yeah, no, I was just curious to know. I was wondering if we could invite some people to, turn on their cameras so we can have a conversation here and see if how many. I would be curious to know how many of you use narrative budgets, for instance. Is that a practice here among us?
See also the TENS materials on creating a narrative budget. We have a how-to guide. It takes you from your line item budget to a narrative budget and applies a process. You can download that from tens.org in our resource library. It's a great tool to help you create a narrative budget. Is anyone out there using a narrative budget?
I'm trying to get to the point where I can. That's one reason I'm on the call today. So.
Great.
Wonderful.
I know that in the context in which I've served, I found them to be very helpful because they help you. I mean, I think as Davey has said, align your money to your mission. And then if you have, for instance, one of the places that I've served, we had, and the diocese does this too, divided up our budget into the ministry areas, and they had discerned, so 3 main categories. And this was a cathedral, so it was a multi-staff situation where then they apportioned sort of the rector's salary across, each of the ministry areas, but then each of the staff members responsible for that area, where then their income was apportioned. And then you were able to also then apportion your buildings and your electrical bill, for instance, so people know that when you're paying, whatever it is, $700 in a month, that it makes that you realize, that $700 a month is actually supporting, these 20 ministries, right? It's allowing or facilitating the ministry of gathering, for instance, and that's why it's so helpful. There is another practice I wondered about, and maybe this is less sort of stewardship, but I still, and more financial practices, but I was working with Jordan Rippey, who has provided courses here on treasure training. And she showed me a budget, and it didn't have a column of where were we percentage wise on how we're doing our spending. And I wondered whether those kinds of, Davey, whether you found those kinds of figures more helpful than absolute dollar values. That way you can see if you're a little out of whack and maybe one category you're overspending or underspending, and you can attend to that, as opposed to looking at something saying we're this dollar amount over or this dollar amount under, because it's easier to look at it in respect to the whole budget, right?
Yeah, exactly. The more we can make it, as you say, specific to a particular area, then we can see where intervention is needed, right? Either way, we're overspending here, or we're having some hiccup over here, or everything's going really great in all areas except for this one. It really helps us then to do that work. And I see a lot of congregations engaging that question.
Yeah, great. And I want to also affirm, not when you have difficulties with your budget, I know that the inclination might be to say, I'm not ready to deal with that, so let's not talk about it. That it's better from upfront to say, okay, how are we going to discuss this and share this with the congregation, because we are the vestry and the treasurers are stewards, and we're in this together, right?
Right.
So I think that I see congregations getting into difficulty when they delay sharing what they perceive to be bad news, but sometimes actually could be good news, because hear me out for a second, is that there's this methodology of innovation called the subtraction method of looking at adaptive leadership. and you take your resources and you say, okay, let's take this resource away. How could you imagine your ministry differently without that resource? And so sometimes seeing a problem might actually be an invitation to a creative solution that's going to actually end you up in a better place, even if that hadn't happened, right? Even if that bad news hadn't happened.
Yep. I wonder if other people have experiences about catching something quick and being able to talk about it in their congregation. I think it also invites solutions, right? When we tell people there's a problem, rather than feeling ashamed about it, we inspire them to help us solve it, right? And this is what Christian community is about, right? Rather than saying, oh, all hope is lost, let's abandon this. No, we dig in. We say, we are people of hope. How can we fix this? How can we work together? And some amazing, innovative, creative solutions can come up when we break problems out of the vestry meeting and talk about them in our sacred space of community. All right, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to start to address Susan's question about how we present this information and talk a little bit more about mission and impact and also our members. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, come up with a couple more slides, and then I'll pull us back into some conversation before we end our presentation. The mission of your congregation is the heart of what you do. It is the reason that you are placed on your street, in your neighborhood, in your city, to do work, to engage your community, to serve your neighbors. So let's talk about it a lot in our church. If we can separate out the conversation about stewardship from our budget and talk more about how we are engaging our neighbors, we provide a more spiritual, more interesting presentation to our members about what's really going on. And I think this is really important as we go into our annual meetings or our budget reviews. When we talk about mission, either through a narrative budget or with reporting, we engage the whole community in what we're doing. You are doing ministry and providing great value and service to your community just by being where you're at. A few years ago, a consulting group called Partners for Sacred Spaces, they do capital campaigns and other congregational development consulting across all faith groups in the United States and Canada. They did a study, a pretty comprehensive study about location and impact. And this is what they discovered. For every temple, mosque, synagogue, and church in America, and there are thousands of them, as you can imagine, for every one of those, there was an average service to the community, value to the community of $1.1 million per congregation. So this takes into account huge mega congregations and tiny rural congregations and everything in between. A house of worship in a community delivers at least an average of $1.1 million worth of service to its neighborhood. This could be by offering community space or 12-step groups or scout groups or other things that churches do. It could be through the programs and ministries that your church runs, tutoring or outreach or senior daycare or food pantries or homelessness engagement or all of the things that we do. It could be in hosting civic meetings and opening our doors as meeting spaces for neighborhood groups or other things. By being there and open and welcoming and available, even churches that are the most inward focused on average provide $1.1 million worth of service to their community. This is really important because it shows that every community has impact. I talk a lot when I'm speaking about impact with our congregations, and some of our smaller congregations say, well, we don't have much outreach. We open for service. We do pastoral care. I'm like, you do pastoral care. This is ministry, right? So that is something that you engage in that people want to support you for. It is one of the things you are doing. So we are always providing service. This is what church is. It's a service institution and a spiritual institution for all of us and our communities. So report on it. I love Rowan's inspiration on how they described the second lesson being an impact story, a testimonial or a witness. I've seen other groups do it, other congregations do it at the announcement time, a minute for mission, things like this. All of that is really important. And I encourage us to think about it not just during the pledge campaign, but perhaps episodically throughout the year as well. Bring in these stories, create testimonials. When we can share stories about our ministries that are in the voices of the people being served by our ministries or by volunteers who are leading them, they are even more impactful than the rector or the vestry standing up and reporting on a ministry. So if it's appropriate to share what a recipient of that ministry and share their story in their own words or redacted, however it's appropriate to do that, it's so important when they put the story into their words and tell the community, this is why your food pantry matters to me and my family. Or this is how my daughter was helped in your after-school tutoring program. Whatever it is, these stories of impact are really important. As you go into your reporting and your annual meeting, I encourage you, please, to bring in voices that are from your clients, if you want to use that word, from the recipients of your outreach ministry. Bring them in some way, whether it's a written report, a video, a storyboard with pictures and words, a slideshow. Do something that puts it in their words and helps your congregation understand what they're doing. When we understand this, or when we hear these stories, it helps us realize that our gifts matter, that they're going towards something, that we're doing something with it. Impact is more important than budget. There's a statement. Our budgets describe how we're going to bring the money in and spend it, but it's the impact that keeps people coming back. It's impact that is the reason we raise money and engage in church in the first place. Our impact on ourselves, on our community, and on our neighbors. So tell the story. This is a truth about the next version of church, whatever we become after the pandemic. We are going to have to be better about asking for numbers and metrics than we have been before. It's not just enough to tell stories, anecdotes. It's now important as well to collect some kind of data about the work that we do. This doesn't mean that we have to turn into social scientists and create massive surveys and difficult statistics to explain our work, but we can ask some questions and deliver some data about our work. How many people are we feeding? how many kids came through our tutoring program, what are the kinds of calls that people receive on the pastoral care team. Tell some stories and collect some data. It's really going to be important. It's also really important because as we look at generational differences in giving, we understand that different generations are motivated to give to church for different reasons. This is going to become more and more evident as our boomer generation and our mature generation either move into a place where they're no longer making gifts because they're unable to make gifts out of their retirement income the way they used to, or perhaps death claims them and there's no longer an ability to make a gift, right? So as those people leave our giving community and are we put in our Gen Z and our millennial members, we're going to have to find the equilibrium of gifts and process and how we engage that question. And at the heart of that is impact. Our boomers and our mature generation folks, they give to institution because it's what you do. This is not, I'm not saying everyone engages in this behavior the same way, but in general, if you look at demographic trends, if you ask a mature generation or a baby boomer why they give to church, it's to support the institution. The church was there for me, so I want to be there for it. This is what we are supposed to do. It's our duty, right? There's that kind of language around it. If you ask a millennial or a Gen Z why they give to church, it's about impact. What are you doing with my money? What are you doing in the community? What's the visible act that comes from my money? If you want it, you have to show that, right? It's a different mindset of donors, and to ignore that is to really, we do so at our own detriment, really, in our churches. So we need to think about data in a different way than we have before. It's going to serve us well if we can start some easy tools, tracking people through our building, tracking members or people who use our services. Having some numbers to go about that is really going to be essential as we rely on younger people to make gifts in our congregation and fund our church. I can't stress this point enough. It's really important that we do this.
So,
yeah.
So Susan, so I think often that there's impact in a church that goes invisible, that's invisible. So for example, trying to think of salaries. Salaries are a huge portion of our budget, but in fact, through our priest or our parish administrator, we're serving the congregation in our community in different ways. So do you have any experience where we've broken down impact of staff salary by, so visitation, supporting community outreach, going to a cluster of church meeting, so that they understand that it's more than just standing in front of church on Sundays?
Yeah. Yes, I have experience with that, and the narrative budget is one of the tools that helps us with that. And so let me talk a little bit more about that rather than just keep hammering at the narrative budget idea. Early on in the pandemic, I was helping a congregation here in the Diocese of California, and I was talking with their senior warden, and she said, I don't understand why we're even raising money right now, because what is our priest doing? We can't have church. And I said, I think your priest is working really hard right now to keep your community engaged. And yeah, you might not be meeting, but you're doing virtual. Like, look at the number of weekday things you're doing in the evenings. Look at how you're using technology. That didn't exist in your church before this last month. And so your priest has been working triply hard to create systems to keep everyone together. And so you might not be able to see them up front every Sunday. You might not be able to hear them preach. You may not be able to take the sacrament, but they are working and church is open, and it's really hard, right? So I know that we all know that. We all experience that, but the conversation with our members happened over and over and over again. And it probably happened in your own community as well. People having to understand that the priest does more than write a sermon and say mass, right? The priest does a whole lot. Going to town hall, going to cluster meetings, engaging with their fellow clergy, engaging ecumenically with clergy in town. Like a committee, there are some churches where the committee meetings don't happen if the clergy isn't a part of it. Church is hard on our clergy, and we expect a lot of them. So in a narrative budget, for example, you can separate out those categories. You can say, here's the role of civic engagement and all the things that go into it, right? Attend a city council meeting, write an occasional letter to the editor, engage people in community outreach and nonprofits. And the clergy may be a part of leading that or inspiring it. So what are the hours? And these are the hard questions to ask clergy, right? How many hours does it take of your week to engage in things that aren't writing a sermon, teaching a class, or saying the Eucharist, right? What are those other tasks that you do? And it's an uncomfortable question for clergy, and it's an uncomfortable question for congregations, because we then learn that our clergy are spending about 60 hours a week and not getting paid 60 hours worth of week time to do really hard work, because they're always engaged on this stuff. As a clergy person, you can barely go to the grocery store without engaging a pastoral conversation, right? And so that's work always happening. And so it's really important that we help our clergy, empower our clergy to report on that. Now, you don't want to make people feel guilty or wrong, but you want to right size their expectations of how clergy are, or all your ministry areas, all of your staff and volunteers, right? I know volunteers in church that are spending hours a week on their ministry, many hours a week, taking away from family time, taking away from other pursuits, gifts that they're perfectly, beautifully happy to give because they love the church. But that comes at some kind of a cost, right? And so we really need to be good about telling those stories, Susan, and quantifying them. So when asked, how many other meetings do you have to go to in a week? It's really important to say, I spend 10 hours, whatever it is, a week engaging in these other things. And that's clericus with my diocese. That's going to another diocesan meeting because I'm on a commission. You all wanted me engaged in diocesan work, so that takes my time, right? I have to study and learn and read and do things that make my teaching and my preaching and my pastoral work better. That's all a part of my time. So we have to ask the question and be ready for the answer from our clergy. There's a long answer to kind of say, yes, please break it down and be really honest and be amazed by the total of hours that you spend. I know you know how many hours you spend, but the conversation that you'll have to have with your vestry and your congregation about this is what it takes to really run this place, and this is what you're willing to pay to make this place run the way it does.
Right.
Maybe there's a disconnect here, and maybe we need to have some deeper conversations about that.
And I also think that volunteers, I'm the treasurer, volunteer treasurer. I spend, 5 hours a week or whatever that number is. I also my day job is as a nonprofit person. So I know that we convert our volunteer hours into a dollar amount. So do you say, does the church encourage that, to convert our volunteer hours to money? Because that's part of the story.
It's part of the story, and I think two things about that. I think it's helpful when you're looking at what does it take to run this ministry, to say it takes this many volunteer hours, this much of our budget, this much of our time. I think when we try to, because we don't pay volunteers, right? When we try and say, well, it costs an additional $100,000 of volunteer hours, that is a little misleading, because they're not real costs, right? We're not, and we're also not giving the volunteer any kind of like, here's your $100,000 tax voucher, right? We're not saying that to them. So I like it because it quantifies it. Again, going back to Jesus uses money as a metaphor for everything, at least 40% of everything. We can have that conversation, but I think it can be misleading or even harmful when we try and quantify it, volunteer hours, into dollars, because what's the going rate for a great volunteer, especially who's leading a ministry? You know, maybe they have 4 decades of experience doing this. Could we pay them 4 decades worth of like all of what that salary would be to run this ministry? We can't. So that's why they're volunteering.
Yeah, it's not perfect. And the dollar amount you come up with, you know, I would use something like Points of Light Foundation or something that gives you a volunteer dollar, but it's part of the, you were talking about looking at something from, if you took it away. Well, if you took away the volunteers that work on this program, it doesn't exist. If I had to replace it with paid staff, it would cost this much more money, right? I mean, it's part of the church's story that we often don't recognize and talk about.
I think
in a very professional manner.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Susan, that again, because in our 21st century economy, we think in terms of time as money, and money is a metaphor that we have going in our head all the time. It can be helpful sometimes to quantify it. If we had to pay for this is what it would be. We're really grateful for our volunteers, but I think stating it and then getting off and focusing on the gratitude for the volunteers, or a summary of the hours that they spend. You know, we had 100 volunteers spend 3,000 hours last year. That's probably a ridiculous number, math on the fly. But we had a lot of volunteers spending a lot of hours doing a lot of ministries in our congregation last year. Here's what that looks like, and here's what it takes to run this institution. And Jennifer just writes, and celebration, right? There should be in your in another session for a different day, when we talk about the end of a pledge campaign. It should be a massive celebration of everyone who's made ministry possible in your congregation that year. All your volunteers, all of your staff, all of the people that you rely on to make your church happen. So thank you. We have a couple more slides, and then we'll have probably 7 or 8 minutes for general questions.
I want to say one thing before you move off of maybe narrative budget is, I know that Rowan has already given you the toolbox, and I've put in there the toolbox a flyer with guides about how to do a narrative budget. And then also if the Episcopal Network of Stewardship has also a template, that would be lovely if we could add that for our viewers today.
Happy to. Love that. We have lots of tools for this, for budgeting and for conversations about it. So happy to share. Great. This is kind of where we were going anyway in our conversation. So I just want to reiterate, we should report. So we've reported on the numbers. We reported on the money, we reported on the mission, and now we need to report on the members. So recognize your volunteers, celebrate them, list what they've done, who they are, what they, celebrate them. Let's talk about our Sunday attendance. Now, that's hard. In 2020 and 2021, we have strange numbers that we're trying to figure out what to do with. But I'm talking about a regular year. Get away from average Sunday attendance and start to really look at engagement. What does your membership look like? Who's coming in? Are you doing things? For example, my community has a really robust Wednesday service. People love it. It's a dinner church, potluck, Eucharist, and then an education block, right? It gets 25 or 30 or 40 people sometimes in a week. And our average Sunday attendance is about 120, right? So we're getting a significant number of people who come to that Wednesday service, and they don't all come on Sundays. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them, Wednesday is church for them. And so when we're reporting on average Sunday attendance, we're missing the other ways that people engage, and we're only focused on Eucharist. I understand that Eucharist is important. That's the way our church thinks about things. But if you have other services throughout the week that attract people, prayer, yoga, other things that are spiritual, that bring us together in our own way, we need to find ways to report on that as well and include it in our mission. And then if we're above or below our goals, yes, our churches have goals for the number of people they would like to see in church, right? And every clergy person or every vestry has it somewhere in their head. And if we talk about that goal at the beginning of the year, we need 7 new households to join this year. We're really hoping that we can get to this number of members, right? Then everyone can be pulling in that direction and help us get there. And when we're above or below goal, we can talk about that. Why? Why is that? Do we have a lot of people move? Are we not engaging the services or the kinds of program that will attract people? Years ago in my own community, we were not growing, and we looked around. We all were sent out in teams of 2 to walk the neighborhood and notice who was there, what was going on, and bring back ideas. And what we noticed was that we couldn't get down the street without competing with the strollers, right? Because there were lots of families with young kids in our neighborhood, but they weren't in our church, right? Because we didn't offer anything for them. And it changed our whole outlook. We're like, they're in our neighborhood, we're not doing anything. If we create something, maybe they'll come. And 20 years later, we have this huge children and family ministry, which we did not have at the time. We need to pay attention to who's coming and who's in the neighborhood and how our mission and members will change. So what about your other small groups, your formation activities, Stephen Ministries, or men's or women's groups, or youth groups? How are your EFM groups, your Bible study groups, your book study groups? How do you report on those? Not just that they're happening, but how engaged people are in them. This all helps give us a robust picture of how many people are in our church and in our community and engaged in different ways. Finally, present new opportunities for engagement. In your presentation or throughout the year, as you think about reviewing where you're at with your mission, your budget, think about new things you can be doing and advertise them, present new opportunities. So maybe people are interested in a particular course of study or a way of thinking, right? Has someone been to Iona and wants to come back and lead a trip or a conversation about Celtic spirituality? Do it. You can have 3 Sunday afternoons. Go for it. Are there new opportunities to present information that are coming from our own membership? One of the things that I always encourage our congregations to think about, especially because so many of us in our Episcopal churches also have day jobs in nonprofits, or maybe serve on nonprofit boards, invite them in to do a presentation. Talk about what their nonprofit does. If there are volunteer opportunities, invite them. If there are great places where your ministries overlap, and nonprofits are ministries, even though they don't call them that, invite those people in to give a presentation, to do a Sunday afternoon or a coffee hour talk on what that nonprofit does. It enriches our community when we bring in the things that we are engaged with and help members identify more ways to plug in to the reign of God and the work that's being done to change the world. More is more. It's good stuff. As you do your presentations and as you think about it, make a big deal about it. Make a big deal about your mid-year budget review. Wrap it up in another event. We're all starting to think about reopening now. If you're doing any kind of a church picnic or a summer activity, make some reporting a part of that. Make it fun, make it something that people want to come to and appreciate because they're learning about the church. Create something that can be put on your website or emailed out, some kind of report on all the things we've talked about. I'm not asking you to redo your annual meeting, although Susan says this is her annual meeting coming up. So this is the time to create those brochures and those ideas, create that mechanism to report out on all the great things you've done. I want to end with some Henry Nouwen, always a good way to end a conversation about fundraising, because his book, A Spirituality of Fundraising, is one of the best reads that I know of that talks about money and our theology of abundance. The best thing about this book, perhaps, is its pithy wisdom and beautiful turns of phrase, but also the fact that it can be read in about 15 minutes. It's a great, wonderful book. And Henry Nouwen tells us, God is a generous giver, but we can only see and enjoy God's generosity when we love God with all our hearts, minds, and strength. As long as we say, I will love you, God, but first show me your generosity, we will remain distant from God and unable to experience what God truly wants to give us, which is life and life in abundance. Celebrate our generosity and our gratitude and the gifts of our community with those God-given beautiful gifts, and celebrate all of the work that we do with gratitude. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to bring us back in and have time for any last comments. I see some stuff in the chat. Jennifer, thank you for connecting us with the resources that the Diocese of Washington is putting out. Any questions about anything we've talked about, or any testimonials, things you're doing to report out in your congregations about the great work you're doing?
I'll share just about, so the congregation that my husband belongs to is St. Margaret's, DC. And I know earlier you shared about having testimonials by people you serve, or who are part of your community, not the Sunday morning community, but perhaps the Monday through Friday community. And that's been extremely effective. And actually it's less of a step of having an outsider come and witness to the insiders. It's really been part of a whole shift in understanding of what ministry is all about with your community. which is, we're in it together, right? It's all
Right.
about relationship. And now actually they're a person who was a former guest or client or is now the director of that program. So it has real potential for transforming the whole understanding of what it means to be stewards of God's creation and relationship with one another, to be able to do that kind of, I would call it porous borders, right? I think as Episcopalians, we need to have a strong center in who we are, but also strong, open doors.
I love that. Porous borders.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Any other great ideas?
Hi, my name is Lucy Austin, and I'm with St. George's Episcopal Church in DC. And I just wanted to give a few ideas that we use to reach out to our community. And we're in a neighborhood that's a very changing, and there are quite a few families and children in our neighborhood. So one of the things we did last year was to erect a cut Christmas tree in the churchyard. And we invited the neighbors to come and add an ornament to the tree.
Oh, what a nice idea.
And the tree was lit with and decorated with lights. And the people in the community absolutely loved that. They came, they put ornaments on the tree, took pictures. So that was a good way to reach out to the community. Another thing that we did in the spring this year at Easter, we had an Easter egg hunt and invited the neighborhoods. We put banners on the fence and invited the neighbors to come. And we were hoping for 10, 20. We had 40 children who came, and they were accompanied by 1 or 2 parents. But we have a large churchyard, so we were able to socially distance. And so that was a great way to reach out to the community. And our minister, she is walking around the neighborhood. She's pretty much there by herself for the past year, but she walks around the neighborhood, meets the neighbors, got to know the people who live, especially on our block. So those are just ways to do the outreach. Another comment I have is about the narrative budget.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, we're not doing narrative budgeting, but I love this idea of doing a narrative budget. And hopefully we can do like a combination of line item and narrative, so that it better people can better understand exactly how the funds are being used. So those are my comments. And thank you all for this very informative way of doing the budget and the mid-year review.
Lucy, thank you so much for your great ideas. Wow, I love your outreach. I love the Christmas tree idea a lot. And of course, the Easter egg hunt, always fun.
Thank you.
I really love that idea of bringing people together and giving them a place to express that creativity. Really good stuff. You're right about a line item budget and a narrative budget. They go side by side. One informs the other, and you can't have one without the other. There are people who need to see that line item budget, and it's also a part of our accountability and transparency. But then we describe the budget, right? We describe it through the narrative, and that really helps us understand how our budget comes together and where we spend it. Great ideas, and I love what you're doing. Thank you for it.
Thank you.
I know that we are at our time, and before we hear what comes next, I wanted to thank you again for participating this morning. I also want to acknowledge and honor that the work of fundraising in church is hard. It's hard and it's beautiful. It's rewarding and it's full of gifts, but it's also full of a lot of hours and a lot of struggle sometimes. And I know that the work that we are called to do is truly vocation. it's not always easy. It is God's work to be given to us. So I really appreciate that you're engaging this. TENS has a lot of resources to help make it easier. So does your diocese. Your diocese is a leader in generating great resources to help congregations be at their best. So take advantage of them. There are lots of tools out there for you, but do also take some time and know that we are grateful for the work that you are doing. We acknowledge you. We see you. It's hard work. Thank you for it. Rowan, do you want to tell us, or Jennifer, do you want to tell us what comes next?
Well, I will, since I'm here. I will, first of all, thank you, Davey, for coming and presenting to us. It's been very helpful. And, money isn't always things that we want to talk about, but it's critical in a market economy, which is the economy in which we live. So I appreciate that. It's also, part of God's creation, right? It's not outside of God's realm. So we are called to be stewards of all of the world. And what I have put in the chat, if you go to www.edow.org/school, you will see all the upcoming offerings that the school will be having. There will be another TENS, I think it's June 5th, coming up in 2 weeks. So I invite you to, see if I can grab the link to that and put that also. It's the year-round stewardship formation. Yep, I will drop the link to register in the chat right now. You will also get an email follow-up with the recording, as well as I'm guessing the slides as well. Yes.
Yeah, slides in English and in Spanish.
Oh, great. Fantastic. And you'll get a follow-up with the recording, the slides, both in English and in Spanish. And just wonderful things happening here in the Diocese of Washington. And we so very appreciate your giving up. Davey, you're in a different time zone, very early in the morning on a Saturday morning. And for the rest of us, it's now 11:30. I think, is it 8:30 there?
Yep,
So
it's 8:30.
Let me tell you all, we need to give it up for Davey for starting this at 7 o'clock in the morning. So, yay for that.
I'm a morning person.
Yeah, good. I want to send you all on your way. May God be with you through this day. May you notice all the places where God is inviting you into relationship. May you see the work of the Holy Spirit between you and your neighbors. May your hands and feet and mouths be blessed to spread the good news and the love of Jesus. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Hallelujah.
God, hallelujah, hallelujah.